The early morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as William stood alone in his private study. His shoulders carried a weight that seemed to grow heavier each day. The golden rays of sunlight that once brought him comfort now felt like spotlights exposing every worry line on his face. He had been awake since 4 in the morning again. Sleep had become a stranger to him over the past few weeks. The endless meetings, royal duties, and public appearances had begun to blur together into one overwhelming mass of responsibility. Kate found him there as she did most mornings now. She carried 2 cups of steaming tea on a silver tray that had been a wedding gift from his grandmother. The sight of her husband standing so still and silent made her heart clench with worry. She could see the tension in every muscle of his body. His hands were clasped behind his back in that formal way he had learned as a child. It was the posture he took when he felt the full weight of his royal destiny pressing down on him. She set the tray down carefully on the mahogany desk that had belonged to his great-grandfather. The soft clink of china against wood was the only sound in the room. William did not turn around even though he surely heard her enter. Kate had seen him like this before, but never for so long. Usually his dark moods would pass after a day or two. This had been going on for weeks now, and she was beginning to feel helpless. The man she had fallen in love with at university seemed to be disappearing bit by bit. Back then he had been so different. He would make her laugh until her stomach hurt. They would stay up late talking about everything and nothing. He had dreams then that went beyond duty and obligation. He wanted to make a real difference in the world. He spoke passionately about causes he cared about. His eyes would light up when he talked about the future they would build together. Now those same eyes looked tired and distant. Even when he smiled for the cameras or shook hands at official events, she could see the emptiness behind his expressions. It was as if he was going through the motions of being Prince William while the real William was locked away somewhere she could not reach. Kate walked slowly to stand beside him at the window. She could feel the coolness of the glass even from a few feet away. The gardens outside were beginning to show the first signs of autumn. The leaves on the old oak trees were starting to turn golden and red. In the distance she could see the morning joggers making their way along the public paths. Normal people living normal lives without the constant pressure of royal protocol. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. Through the fabric of his shirt she could feel how tense he was. Every muscle was tight with stress. When he finally turned to look at her, she saw something in his eyes that frightened her. It was not anger or sadness exactly. It was emptiness. As if the spark that made him who he was had been slowly dimming and now threatened to go out completely. William tried to give her one of his reassuring smiles, but it did not reach his eyes. Kate knew him too well to be fooled by such gestures. She had watched him master the art of public faces over the years they had been together. He could smile and wave and say all the right things while inside he was struggling. But he had never hidden his true feelings from her before. This new distance between them scared her more than she wanted to admit. The palace around them was already coming to life. She could hear the soft footsteps of staff members beginning their daily routines. Somewhere in the distance, a phone was ringing. The machinery of royal life was starting up for another day. Soon there would be briefings and meetings and official functions. William would put on his public face and play his part perfectly. But Kate wondered how much longer he could keep it up. She thought about their children sleeping peacefully in their beds down the hall. George, Charlotte, and Louis had no idea that their father was struggling. To them, he was still the dad who read bedtime stories and helped with homework when his schedule allowed. But even with the children, she had noticed him becoming more formal lately, more distant, as if he was forgetting how to simply be their father without thinking about his role as future king. The weight of expectation had always been part of their lives. Kate had known what she was signing up for when she married into the royal family, but she had believed that their love would be strong enough to carry them through anything. Now she was not so sure. The institution seemed to be swallowing the man she loved whole. William finally spoke, but his voice sounded hollow and tired. He talked about the schedule for the day ahead. 3 official engagements and 2 private meetings. every minute accounted for and planned by others. He spoke as if he was reading from a script. There was no enthusiasm or energy in his words. Just resignation. Kate listened and nodded, but inside she was making her own plans. She could not stand to watch the man she loved disappear into duty and obligation. There had to be something she could do to bring back the William she had fallen in love with. The one who had swept her off her feet with his genuine warmth and infectious laughter. The one who had convinced her that being royal did not mean losing your humanity. As she watched him gather his papers and prepare for another day of performances, she made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way to save her husband from drowning in his own destiny. She would remind him of who he really was beneath all the titles and expectations. She just had to figure out how. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting longer shadows across the study floor. Soon, William would leave for his first appointment, and she would begin her own day of royal duties. But for now they stood together in the quiet morning light, two people who loved each other deeply but were struggling to find their way back to each other through the maze of royal protocol and public expectation that surrounded their every move. The sound of children's laughter filled the long corridors of Kensington Palace like music. George, Charlotte, and Louis were racing through the halls playing their favorite game of tag. Their small feet created a thunder of joy that echoed off the ancient walls. The palace staff smiled as they watched the young royals bringing life to the formal spaces that had seen centuries of serious, grown-up business. Kate stood in the doorway of the morning room watching her children play. Their happiness was infectious, and for a moment she felt her own spirits lift. George was chasing his younger siblings around the large dining table while they shrieked with delight. Charlotte's pigtails bounced as she ran, and Louis stumbled slightly but kept going with determination. These were the moments that reminded Kate why everything they did mattered. These three beautiful children were the future, and they deserved to grow up knowing joy. But even as she smiled at their games, Kate's mind kept returning to William. He had left for his first engagement of the day without saying goodbye properly. Just a quick kiss on the cheek and a mumbled comment about being late. The man who used to steal extra moments with his family before leaving for work now seemed eager to escape into his official duties. The children noticed their father's absence too, even though they were too young to understand what was happening. George had asked twice yesterday why Daddy seemed so serious all the time. Charlotte had tried to show William a drawing she made, but he had been too distracted to give it proper attention. Even little Louis seemed to sense the change in the household atmosphere. Kate decided to take the children to their favorite spot in the palace gardens. The private area where they could play without cameras or curious onlookers. It was a place where they could just be a normal family for a little while. She gathered coats and shoes while explaining to the children that they were going on a garden adventure. Got outside, the autumn air was crisp and clean. The leaves crunched under their feet as they walked along the winding paths. The children immediately scattered to explore their favorite hiding spots behind the large hedges. Kate sat on the old wooden bench that had become her thinking place over the years. From here, she could watch the children play while also keeping an eye on the palace. Windows. She wondered if William was looking out at them from his office window. Did he wish he could join them, or was he too caught up in his paperwork to even notice they were outside? The distance between them felt like an ocean even when they were in the same room. She had tried everything she could think of to reach him, but nothing seemed to work. Last week she had planned a quiet dinner for just the two of them. She had asked the kitchen to prepare all his favorite foods. She had even found a bottle of wine from their honeymoon trip. But William had spent most of the evening checking his phone and discussing upcoming royal tours. The romantic evening she had imagined turned into another business meeting. She had also suggested they take a weekend trip to their country home in Norfolk. Just the family with no official duties or scheduled appearances. William had agreed, but then spent the entire time making phone calls and reviewing documents. Even when they walked on the beach, he seemed a million miles away. The children had tried to get his attention by building sandcastles and collecting shells, but he barely noticed their efforts. Kate's closest friends had started to notice the change too. During their weekly coffee meetings, they would ask carefully worded questions about how things were going. She could see the concern in their eyes, but she always gave diplomatic answers. How could she explain that her husband was disappearing into his royal role without sounding like she was complaining about their privileged life? The truth was that Kate understood the pressure William was under. She had watched him struggle with the expectations placed on him since childhood. Every decision he made was analyzed by the media and the public. Every word he spoke was recorded and studied. The weight of representing the monarchy while also trying to modernize it was enormous. But she also knew that losing himself in duty would not help anyone. She remembered the early days of their relationship when William would talk for hours about the kind of king he wanted to be someday. He had big dreams about using his position to make real changes in the world. He wanted to help young people find their purpose. He was passionate about conservation and mental health awareness. His eyes would light up when he discussed these topics, and she could see the man he was meant to become. That passionate and caring man was still inside him somewhere. Kate was sure of it, but the daily grind of royal protocol and endless obligations was burying him deeper every day. She watched George trying to teach Louis how to climb a small tree and saw so much of William in their eldest son. The same determination and gentle leadership. She did not want George to grow up thinking that being royal meant giving up your dreams and personality. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, Kate called the children back inside. They protested loudly, wanting to stay outside longer, but she promised them hot chocolate and biscuits in the kitchen. The palace staff always enjoyed having the young royals visit their domain, and the children loved getting special treats from the chefs, while the children were distracted with their snacks. Kate found herself thinking about William's military days. Those had been some of the happiest years of their marriage. He had found purpose and meaning in his work as a search and rescue pilot. He would come home from missions with stories of people he had helped and lives he had saved. There was a light in his eyes then that she had not seen in months, maybe. That was the key to helping him remember who he really was. But how could she bring back that sense of purpose and fulfillment when his current role seemed to drain him of energy rather than inspire him? She needed to find a way to remind William of the impact he could have when he was truly engaged with meaningful work. As evening approached and William's return home grew closer, Kate made a decision. She would not give up on her husband or their marriage. Whatever it took, she would find a way to bring back the man she had fallen in love with. The man who was still there somewhere beneath all the royal expectations and formal obligations. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Kate was sitting in her private office reviewing charity documents. She had been reading the same paragraph 3 times because her mind kept wandering to William. He had left that morning without eating breakfast again, and she was worried about him. The ringing of her secure phone line interrupted her thoughts. Sarah Mitchell, William's private secretary, was on the other end of the line. Her voice carried an unusual tone that immediately caught Kate's attention. Sarah had worked for the royal family for over 15 years and was known for her calm professional manner. But today she sounded different. There was something almost excited in her voice, though she was trying to hide it. Kate, Sarah said, there is something rather unusual that I need to discuss with you privately. Could we perhaps meet this afternoon when the prince is at his engagement in Birmingham? Kate felt her curiosity stir for the first time in weeks. Sarah was not someone who dealt in unusual matters. Everything in their world was carefully planned and predictable. The idea that something unexpected had happened was both concerning and intriguing. They arranged to meet in Kate's private sitting room at 3 o'clock. Kate spent the rest of the morning wondering what could be so important that Sarah needed to speak with her alone. Had something happened that she needed to know about before William? Was there some kind of security concern or family matter that required her attention? By the time Sarah arrived, Kate's imagination had run through dozens of possibilities. Sarah entered carrying a leather folder and wearing an expression that Kate had never seen before. She looked almost nervous, which was completely unlike her usual composed self. After declining Kate's offer of tea, Sarah sat down and opened her folder carefully. She pulled out several sheets of paper and placed them on the coffee table between them. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah began, "I have been contacted by someone who has been trying to reach Prince William for several months. The usual channels have not worked because this person does not have official connections or government backing. They have been quite persistent, though, and yesterday they found a way to reach me directly." Kate leaned forward, interested despite herself. Sarah continued, explaining that the person who had made contact was connected to William's time in the Royal Air Force, specifically his years as a search and rescue pilot when he was stationed in Wales. Kate's heart began to beat faster. Those had been such good years for William. He had felt useful and important in a completely different way than his royal duties made him feel. The caller, Sarah explained, represented a group of people whose lives had been touched by William's service as a pilot. They had been trying to organize something special to show their appreciation, but had been blocked by security protocols and official procedures. What they wanted to do required careful planning and complete secrecy. Most importantly, it would need to be a surprise. Kate felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope, real, genuine hope that maybe there was a way to help William remember who he was beneath all the royal protocol. She asked Sarah to explain exactly what these people wanted to do, and why it had to be kept secret. Sarah opened another folder and began to describe the most incredible plan Kate had ever heard. The group included people who had been rescued by William's team during his military service. Some were families who had been saved from flooding. Others had been pulled from mountain accidents or maritime emergencies. There were also fellow service members who had worked alongside William and remembered his dedication and skill. What they wanted to do was arrange a gathering where William could meet some of the people whose lives he had helped save. But they wanted to do more than just have a meeting. They wanted to show him the impact his service had made in ways he had never fully understood. Some of the people he had rescued had gone on to do amazing things with the lives he had helped save. Others had children and grandchildren who existed because of his actions. The logistical challenges were enormous, Sarah explained. They would need to coordinate with multiple government agencies and security services. The location would have to be carefully chosen and secured. Most importantly, they would need to create a cover story that would get William to the right place at the right time without him suspecting anything. Kate's mind was racing with possibilities. This could be exactly what William needed. A reminder that his work had meaning beyond ribbon-cutting ceremonies and state dinners. A chance to see that his efforts to serve had made a real difference in real people's lives. But it would require careful planning and absolute secrecy. Sarah continued describing the proposal. The organizers had suggested a modest community center in a small town not far from where William had been stationed. They could arrange for it to look like a routine charity visit or community engagement. William would expect to meet local officials and perhaps tour some facilities. Instead, he would walk into a room full of people whose lives he had helped save. The more Kate heard, the more excited she became, but she also realized how much work this would require. They would need to coordinate schedules and create believable cover stories. Security would need to be arranged without William's knowledge. Most challenging of all, they would need to keep the secret from someone who was trained to notice when things were not quite right. Kate looked at Sarah and saw her own excitement reflected in the older woman's eyes. For the first time in months, Kate felt like she had a real plan. Something concrete she could do to help her husband instead of just watching him struggle. This surprise could remind William of the man he had been before duty and protocol had worn him down. She told Sarah that she wanted to move forward with the plan. Whatever it took to make this happen, she was willing to do it. Sarah smiled and began pulling out more detailed plans and contact information. They had a lot of work ahead of them, but Kate felt more energized than she had in months. Finally, she had a way to fight for her marriage and her husband's happiness. Kate threw herself into the secret planning with an energy she had not felt in months. Every morning she would wake up before dawn with her mind already racing through the dozens of details that needed to be arranged. For the first time since William's dark mood had begun, she had something concrete to focus on. Something that gave her hope that she could make a real difference. Working with Sarah became like running a covert operation inside the palace. They would meet in different locations each day to avoid suspicion, sometimes in Kate's private office when William was away. Other times they would walk in the gardens pretending to discuss charity work while actually coordinating the surprise. Sarah had contacts throughout the military and government who were eager to help once they understood what they were trying to accomplish. The first challenge was creating a believable cover story. They needed something that would get William to the right location without making him suspicious. After much discussion, they decided on a routine community engagement. William would think he was visiting a local community center to meet with youth groups and discuss mental health programs. It was exactly the kind of event that filled his schedule regularly, so he would not question it. Kate had to be especially careful around William during this time. Her excitement about the project was hard to hide, and she caught herself smiling at unexpected moments. When William asked about her improved mood, she would mention a new charity initiative she was supposedly developing. The lies felt uncomfortable, but she reminded herself they were for a good cause. The guest list was the most emotional part of the planning process. Sarah had made contact with dozens of people whose lives had been touched by William's search and rescue work. Each person had a story that brought tears to Kate's eyes. There was the elderly farmer who had been trapped in floodwaters for 6 hours before William's team pulled him to safety. The young mother who had gone into premature labor during a severe storm and been airlifted to hospital just in time. The teenage hiker who had fallen down a cliff face and would have died without the rescue that William had coordinated. But the stories did not end with the rescues themselves. Kate learned about what had happened to these people in the years since William had saved their lives. The farmer had gone on to develop new farming techniques that helped his community survive other natural disasters. The young mother's premature baby had grown up to become a doctor herself. The teenage hiker had become a mountain rescue volunteer, helping to save others just as he had been saved. Each story reinforced Kate's belief that this surprise was exactly what William needed. He had no idea how far the ripples of his service work had spread. The people he had saved had gone on to save others in turn. Lives had been built and families had grown because of split-second decisions he had made years ago. If he could see the real impact of his work, maybe he would remember why service mattered so much to him. The logistics were incredibly complex. Security had to be arranged without alerting William's usual protection team. Alternative routes had to be planned and backup locations identified. Kate found herself learning about things like helicopter landing zones and emergency evacuation procedures. Sarah introduced her to military personnel who spoke in codes and acronyms that sounded like a foreign language. Meanwhile, Kate had to continue her normal royal duties while hiding her excitement about the secret project. She attended charity lunches and ribbon-cutting ceremonies with a smile that felt more genuine than it had in weeks. When reporters asked about her upcoming projects, she would give vague answers about mental health initiatives and community outreach programs. The irony was not lost on her that she was lying to protect a surprise designed to bring more honesty and authenticity to their lives. The hardest part was watching William continue to struggle without being able to tell him that help was coming. He seemed to be getting worse rather than better. His sleep problems had increased and he was barely eating. Even the children had started asking Kate why Daddy seemed so sad all the time. She had to find ways to reassure them without explaining what was really happening. One evening, Kate found William sitting alone in his study staring at old photographs. She recognized some of the pictures from his military days. There he was in his flight suit standing next to a rescue helicopter. Another photo showed him with his fellow pilots after a particularly difficult mission. In every picture his smile looked genuine and his eyes were bright with purpose. William looked up at her with an expression of such sadness that Kate almost told him about the surprise right then and there. He said he had been thinking about the old days when his work felt meaningful, when he could see the direct impact of his efforts and know that he was making a real difference. Now he felt like he was just going through the motions of being royal. Without any real purpose behind his actions, Kate sat beside him and took his hand. She wanted desperately to tell him that he had made more of a difference than he knew, that there were people alive today because of his courage and skill, people who had built amazing lives on the foundation of the second chances he had given them. But she forced herself to stay silent and simply offer him the comfort of her presence. As the date of the surprise grew closer, Kate found herself both excited and nervous. So much could go wrong. William might refuse to go to the event. Security concerns could force them to cancel. The secret could be discovered at the last minute. But despite all the risks, Kate knew they had to try. Her husband was drowning in duty and obligation, and this might be the lifeline that could pull him back to himself. 2 weeks before the planned surprise, Kate made the final arrangements. Guest confirmations were received and security clearances were approved. The cover story was solid and William's schedule had been successfully manipulated. Everything was ready for what Kate hoped would be the most important day of their marriage. The morning of the surprise dawned crisp and clear with autumn colors painting the countryside in brilliant shades of gold and red. Kate woke before her alarm clock, her heart already racing with nervous excitement. She lay in bed for a few minutes watching William sleep peacefully beside her. His face looked younger and more relaxed in sleep, free from the weight of responsibility that had been crushing him for so many weeks. Today would either be the breakthrough she had been praying for or a well-intentioned disaster that might make things even worse between them. Kate pushed that negative thought away and focused on getting ready for what she hoped would be one of the most important days of their marriage. She had told William they were attending a routine community engagement at a youth center in Surrey. Something so ordinary and typical that he had barely asked for details when she mentioned it weeks ago. It was the kind of event that filled their schedules regularly, and William approached these obligations with professional courtesy but little enthusiasm anymore. As they got dressed that morning, Kate found herself memorizing every detail of the moment. The way William straightened his tie in the mirror with automatic precision, the sound of his footsteps on the marble floor of their bedroom, the familiar scent of his cologne that she had loved since their university days. She wanted to remember everything about this morning because she sensed that by evening everything might be different. The car ride through the Surrey countryside was both beautiful and tense. Kate kept stealing glances at her husband as he stared out the window at the passing landscape. The trees were in full autumn glory and the fields were golden with harvest crops. It was the kind of day that should have lifted anyone's spirits, but William seemed as distant as ever. They had been driving for about 30 minutes when William's expression changed slightly. Kate saw his brow furrow as he began to pay more attention to their route. As someone who had received extensive security training, he was always aware of where they were going, and today something seemed different. I thought we were going to that youth center in Guildford, William said, looking at Kate with a questioning expression. Kate felt her stomach clench with nerves but managed to keep her voice steady as she explained there had been a change in plans. The original venue had some kind of scheduling conflict, so they were going to a different location instead. William accepted her explanation, but she could see him becoming more alert. His training was kicking in as he automatically assessed their surroundings en route. Kate prayed that nothing would seem obviously wrong to him before they reached their destination. The car turned down a narrow country lane lined with hedgerows that were heavy with autumn berries. Kate could see their destination ahead, a modest brick building surrounded by several cars and a few official-looking vehicles. To William, it would look like a typical community center preparing for a royal visit. He had no way of knowing that. Every person in those cars had a connection to his past that he could never have imagined. As they pulled to a stop, Kate turned to face her husband fully for the first time that morning. She wanted to see his face clearly when the surprise began to unfold. William was still looking around with that slightly puzzled expression he got when something did not quite match his expectations. But he was also automatically shifting into his public mode, preparing to meet whatever group of local officials and community leaders were waiting inside. Kate took his hand as they sat in the car for just a moment longer. She could feel the tremor in her own fingers as excitement and nervousness battled inside her chest. This was it. After weeks of planning and preparation, everything came down to the next few minutes. Either she was about to give her husband the most meaningful surprise of his life, or she was about to make a terrible mistake. William squeezed her hand gently and gave her one of his professional smiles, the kind he used to reassure her before they walked into difficult or uncomfortable situations together. He had no idea that she was the one trying to reassure him this time. They stepped out of the car together, and Kate immediately heard a sound that made her heart soar. In the distance beyond the buildings there was the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotor blades. It was faint but growing closer, and she saw William's head turn sharply toward the sound. For just a moment his carefully controlled expression cracked, and she saw a flash of the man she had fallen in love with. The sound of helicopters had once been as familiar to William as his own heartbeat. During his years as a search and rescue pilot he had lived and breathed that rhythm. It was the sound of purpose and mission and lives being saved. Kate watched his face as recognition and memory began to stir something deep inside him. The small group of people waiting near the building entrance were not the local officials William was expecting to meet. Sarah was there, of course, along with a few security personnel, but the others were faces he had not seen in years. Fellow pilots from his squadron, ground crew members who had worked on his helicopter, people whose names he would remember even if he could not quite place where he knew them from. William's professional composure was beginning to crack as confusion mixed with growing recognition. Kate could see him trying to process what he was seeing and why these particular people were here. His eyes moved from face to face, and she could almost see his mind working to make connections that did not quite make sense yet. Then Kate saw her walking slowly toward them from the group near the building. Mrs. Henderson was exactly as Sarah had described her. A small elderly woman with silver hair and bright eyes that held a lifetime of stories. She was walking carefully but with determination and purpose. Behind her was a young man Kate had never seen before, but whose presence here would soon make perfect sense to William. This was the moment Kate had been planning and dreaming about for weeks. The moment when her husband would begin to understand the true impact of the work he had done and the lives he had touched. The moment when he might remember who he really was beneath all the royal protocol and expectations that had been crushing his spirit. William's hand trembled slightly as he reached for Kate's arm, his eyes never leaving the approaching figure of Mrs. Henderson. The confusion on his face was giving way to something deeper as memories began to surface from years ago. Kate could see the exact moment when recognition hit him like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat, and his carefully maintained royal composure started to crumble. Mrs. Henderson moved slowly, but with purpose, her weathered hands clasped in front of her. Behind her, the young man Kate had never seen before walked with quiet confidence. There was something in his eyes that reminded Kate of William himself. The same gentle strength and quiet determination that had first attracted her to her husband all those years ago. Kate felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes as she watched the scene unfold. After weeks of planning and secrecy, the moment she had dreamed about was finally happening. William was about to discover something that would change everything. Something that would remind him of who he really was beneath all the royal duties and obligations that had been wearing him down. The other people from William's past were gathering closer now. His former squadron leader stepped forward first, extending his hand with a smile that spoke of shared missions and dangerous rescues. Flight Sergeant Davies had aged since William last saw him, but his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence that had made him such an effective leader during their time together in Wales. "Sir William," Davies said, using William's military rank rather than his royal title. "It has been far too long since we served together." The sound of his old rank, spoken by someone who had known him as a pilot rather than a prince, seemed to shake something loose inside William. Kate saw his shoulders straighten slightly as if he was unconsciously falling back into military posture. More faces appeared from the group near the building. Sarah Chun, the aircraft mechanic who had kept William's helicopter running during some of their most challenging missions. Marcus Thompson, the paramedic who had worked alongside William on countless rescues. Each person carried memories of a time when William had felt truly useful and purposeful, but it was Mrs. Henderson who held everyone's attention as she continued her slow walk toward William. When she was just a few feet away, she stopped and looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with unshed tears. "Your Royal Highness," she said in a voice that quavered with emotion, "I have been trying to reach you for so long. There is someone very special I need you to meet." She turned slightly and gestured for the young man behind her to step forward. "This is my grandson James," she said with pride filling every word. "The grandson I never thought I would live to see grow up. The grandson who exists today because of what you did for me 7 years ago." William's face went completely white as the full impact of her words hit him. Kate watched as the memory came flooding back to him. The terrible flooding in Wales that had trapped so many people in their homes. The elderly woman they had pulled from her house just minutes before the building was completely destroyed by the rushing water. He had been so focused on the technical aspects of the rescue that he had never really thought about what happened to the people afterward. Mrs. Henderson continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. "After you saved me that day, I was able to be there when my daughter gave birth to James 6 months later. I was able to help raise him and watch him take his first steps and say his first words. I was able to teach him to read and help him with his homework. All because you risked your life to pull an old woman out of floodwater." James stepped forward then, and Kate could see he was struggling to control his own emotions. "Your Royal Highness," he said in a voice that was respectful but not formal, "my grandmother has told me the story of that day hundreds of times. How your helicopter came down through the storm. How you personally came into the water to get her when the rope rescue was not working. How you stayed calm and kept her calm even when everything seemed hopeless." William was openly crying now, the tears streaming down his face as he looked from Mrs. Henderson to her grandson and back again. Kate had not seen her husband cry since his grandmother's funeral, and even then he had tried to hide his emotions. Now he made no attempt to control the tears that spoke of years of buried feelings finally being released, but the surprises were not over yet. Sarah Chen stepped forward carrying a thick folder that she handed to William with a smile. "Sir," she said, "we have been keeping track. This folder contains letters and photos from 43 people whose lives you directly saved during your service. Years, but that is not the whole story. These people went on to save others in turn. The ripple effect of your service has touched hundreds of lives." William opened the folder with shaking hands, and Kate saw his eyes widen as he began to read. Letter after letter from people he had rescued and their families. Photos of children who had been born because their parents survived. Stories of careers chosen and lives dedicated to helping others because someone had once helped them. One letter was from the teenage hiker William had saved from the cliff face. He had become a mountain rescue volunteer and had personally saved 12 other climbers over the years. Another was from the young mother who had been airlifted during her difficult pregnancy. She had become a nurse specializing in emergency medicine and had delivered hundreds of babies safely. Kate watched as William read story after story of lives that had been built on the foundation of his service. Each rescue had created possibilities that stretched far into the future. Children who grew up to become doctors and teachers and rescue workers themselves. Families that stayed together because tragedy had been averted. Communities that were stronger because their members had been saved. The sound of helicopter rotors was getting closer now, and William looked up from the letters to see his old aircraft approaching for a ceremonial flyover. The sight of the familiar red and yellow rescue helicopter against the autumn sky was the final piece of the surprise that Kate had arranged. As William stood there surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, Kate saw the transformation she had been hoping for. The weight seemed to lift from his shoulders and the light returned to his eyes. For the first time in months he looked like the man she had fallen in love with. The man who understood that true service meant making a real difference in real people's lives.